Hello and welcome to a new video. So today I thought we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to go house hunting in Scotland. So I did a video a little while ago about us finding a house that we really liked, that we didn't end up getting. So that started the whole idea of us wanting to move. So this is never going to happen. So I'm not sure why I'm telling you about it, but Jack and I saw a house. And we didn't get the house. And we've been looking at a few places, so I thought it could be fun if I took you guys along and kind of like shared our experiences, but also generally talked about what it's like to try to buy a house in Scotland and what to expect, especially if you're not from Scotland, because I grew up in Germany, so my expectations of what buying a place would be like were very different to what it was like in the end. As a little bit of background, I've been talking about this already in my previous video, but just to make this video a bit more comprehensive, I'm going to talk about it again. We've been living in our flat for about 4 years now, so we bought this right as I got my first job because I did my master's, and we really wanted to have a flat because in Scotland when you're renting you really don't have any rights, so you can't paint, you can't change anything. And also the landlord is in theory allowed to come by every half year to check on what the flat looks like. So it never felt like we actually had a home. It always felt like we were just, staying in someone else's place. So the idea of having a place that we can call our own was always really deeply rooted within us. So we got this flat. And when we got it, my dad was like, "Are you sure you want to move into a 50 square meter flat?" And that is the first point you have to be very aware of if you wanted to buy a house in Scotland. Everything is tiny here. So this flat is by no means the smallest flat you can find in Scotland. It is traditionally a one-bedroom flat, but because flats are valued based on how many bedrooms they are, people historically try to cram as many bedrooms into a flat as possible. So that means that every room is a little bit smaller than it should be to be practical, which is really something we feel here. Also, when you're looking at flats in Scotland, you'll often find something that says 2 bedrooms, and then you'll find a living room that is like an okay size, but then it also has a kitchen in it. So it's like, well, if the living room has a kitchen, then it's not really a 2-bedroom, is it? It's a 1-bedroom because the kitchen is the living room. This is just a theme you'll find in Scotland looking for houses. Or there is always normally this storage cupboard, which is at the end of hallways. And you will then find that often the bathroom or the kitchen is put into the storage cupboard. And it's like, this is not big enough to be a kitchen or a bathroom, which is also what happened in our flat. The bathroom is in that storage cupboard. Zero ventilation, honestly. It's just so stupid. This flat would make sense if it was 4 rooms and there was, a bedroom, the bathroom, and what the kitchen is. That room, which is our 2nd bedroom, should be the kitchen, and this should be the living room, and the bathroom should just be a storage cupboard. That would somewhat work, but so with that as a background, we love this flat. We really put in our soul to make it our own. When we first moved in, it had a log burner and just like a random piece of wood as a mantel nailed to the wall. So we really put in a lot of effort to make it Victorian again and to bring it back to its previous glory. And if you're wondering what's actually happening with the floors currently and why the living room is so weirdly empty, we're currently redoing the floors because we first stained them when we moved in and we did it wrong. So now we have to redo everything, which is why everything is so bright currently, but it's gonna go back to a little bit more suitable color soon. So with all of that in mind, we love the flat. It is really pretty. It has some issues, as every Victorian building has, but it's just very, very small. So the kitchen is so small that when I cook and Jack wanted to come in and do something, I'd have to actually leave the kitchen for him to be able to go in. Like if I lived here by myself, I'd actually be really happy. It just feels like with 2 people, 2 pets, and potentially one day having a family, it just doesn't work. But we love the flat, we love the neighborhood, we love the village we live in, so we don't want to sell it either because it feels like it's like a safe haven for us. So that's why we ended up deciding that we're going to rent this flat out and keep it as an asset as well, just because we both don't have a high income. So it just feels like this might be a way of maybe eventually having a little bit of retirement money. And that also being said, whenever I talk to friends and family in Germany, when I talk about, prices of houses in Scotland, everyone's just shocked as to how cheap houses are here. And that is, my kind reminder to all of you that we British people, I'm not British, but I live in the UK, make very, very little money. So it's still really expensive for us to buy here, especially it requires a lot of cash, and renting is really expensive in the UK, which makes it then hard to save up for a deposit, because here you have to pay 10% deposit on your mortgage, but also you need to pay everything that is offers over. So that's the common system in Scotland. You will, for example, if a house was valued at 100,000, you'll probably find it listed for offers over 90,000. But that means realistically it's worth 100,000. They're not going to accept less. But then you also want to offer more because probably it's going to be really popular. Places in Scotland sell so quickly. Like our neighbor's flat was up on the market for 2 weeks before it sold. So, it's just insane. If something was 90,000 over 100,000 worth, it's probably going to sell for between 115 and 130,000. So anything over 100,000 is going to be cash you pay. So it kind of adds up. It's a lot of cash, especially now with properties getting more and more expensive. So if you're looking at buying something in a nice area, you might pay 30% over. And if the house is worth 200,000, we're speaking about 60,000 just for offers over. And then another 10% in deposit. So that out of the way, that's kind of the background how to buy in Scotland. So we found this house and we weren't actually actively looking to move. It just, something that we do for fun, just to keep an eye on the market. But the house was honestly everything I've ever wanted. You can watch my other video for me to rant about it for about half an hour. But just to say, it had a few weak spots, but generally I loved the house itself. The neighborhood wasn't quite what I wanted, but I really wanted to have that backyard and the front yard and a staircase. And I was just like, I want this. And then we put in an offer, but unfortunately, because it also needed central heating to be installed, because the Victorian houses should have central heating, but if no one has done it in the past 50 years, then they might not. So that is what happened in this house. There was no central heating. There were working fireplaces, but you have to have central heating. So that would have to be installed. It needed replumbing. It needed rewiring for the electricity. The floors needed redoing. Quite a lot of money that needed to be paid on top of the deposit. And then also, because it would be our second flat, it would be a second property tax on it. So we weren't able to offer over very much, but other people were. So that's why we ended up not getting it. And then Jack was kind of like, if you want a house, realistically, we have to find a place in a worse location than this to be able to afford it. And the location was already, it wasn't bad. The street itself was actually really cute, but it was right next to the airport. And then besides the street, there was a lot of industry. So it wasn't a place that I saw myself walking Archie and being like, oh, how blessed am I to live here? But then also I don't like leaving the house anyway. So if the house is nice, I would have been fine with it. So we continued looking at places that came online. So I thought it would be fun to kind of chat about places that we considered. Some of them we never viewed, but everyone loves looking at houses. So I'm just going to show you some pictures of, flats that were a possibility and the one that we ended up getting. Going to Rightmove, which is the place to go when you're looking for property in Scotland. So seeing that houses were maybe a bit out of the budget, I then thought maybe maisonette flats would be an option, because I really wanted to have a staircase, even though I don't want to clean it. Just the idea of having stairs, I don't know, did something to me. So we found this flat in Carluke, which is east of Glasgow, which was kind of like where we really wanted to go anyways, because Jack's family living in Dundee and Perth. His friends are there, so it would be nice to be east of Glasgow to get to his family and friends quicker. So Carluke was not necessarily a town that stood out to me ever before. The flat was on the high street, so that was not perfect, but the pictures of the flat were actually really nice. So there were shops, and then you would walk in and there's a staircase that leads up, and then you've got a big living room. The kitchen needed redoing. All the floors needed redoing as well, but it had so much space. It had 4 bedrooms, and the staircase itself within the flat was so pretty, and the hallway was also massive. And I was just like, this is really nice, but 75,000. So I was like, that I don't think this is right. So we requested the home report, and that's when it became obvious why it was 75,000. There was like huge leaks in the ceiling. Some of the ceiling had collapsed underneath the bathroom into the kitchen. The entire roof had woodworm, so needed to be treated for that. So it was obvious that, you know, the 75,000, there was a reason for why it was so cheap. And even though Jack and I wouldn't shy away from a project, but we're not big DIYers, so it felt like, you know, this is out of scope for us to find people to do all of that for us. So in itself, this was a nice flat, but it's just too much work. We saw a flat in Dunblane that was really nice. It was above a shop again. The flat is a 3-bedroom, so that's what we were looking for. We wanted to have a bedroom more than we currently have. It felt a bit modernized from the inside, but it was kind of move-in ready, which is also nice. The big thing about this flat is it is only 63 square meters. So it felt like it's not significantly bigger than this flat, but it has a bedroom more, so it's going to be equally as cramped. So then we actually never ended up looking at it, because it just felt like it would be nice to have a bedroom more, but it would even be better to just have everything be a little bit bigger, just so that, you know, it feels like you have a little bit of space to breathe. And then the house in Shotts came up. So again, one of those east of Glasgow villages that I've never ever thought about before. So we actually saw this house as we were driving, and I was telling Jack about it, and he was obviously like on the wheel driving, and it was just like, oh, it's like a Victorian house. It has like bay windows. It's perfect. It's so pretty. So Jack was like, yeah, just call them and ask for the house report and the viewing. Like, he hadn't even seen the pictures yet. I was just describing it. So this one was like one of the ones I was really into. The inside needed updating. So it was very kind of like early 2000s, but it was massive, 3 bedrooms. The bathroom needed redoing. Like, it wasn't like horrible, but it was not good. So it was offers over 130, so probably worth 140 or so. So that would have been in our budget. So yeah, we were just really liking it. But then when we got the home report, we realized actually this area is quite expensive, and the neighboring houses had sold for like 100,000 more. So there's some serious issues with this house, which included it needing new electricity, it needing new windows because some of the windows were smashed, you know, water damage, bathroom needs redoing, floors need redoing. And again, it became such a big project that we realized, you know, this is maybe out of scope for us. So we never ended up viewing it. I would have loved to view this flat, but also the agents were being really weird about viewing it. We're just like, oh yeah, we can do tomorrow or in like 3 weeks, but also it's really popular, so you should probably like tomorrow. And we were just like, well, we're kind of working tomorrow, so a bit more notice please. Never ended up viewing it, which is a shame. I would have loved to see it. It had also like a really nice front yard and everything, but again, we just felt like it probably is more than we can realistically do. So then we started looking at what has been on the market for a while, because that way you don't have the pressure, because it feels like when something comes on the market, it often sells within 2 weeks or so. So you have to view it and make your decision and then hand in like a really high offer as soon as possible. And I don't really care for that pressure, because I feel like making such a big decision feels like you want to have a bit of time to think it through properly. So Jack found this flat that was a maisonette flat in Greenock. So Greenock is one of those towns, kind of like Paisley, that used to really thrive before the First World War, has amazing Victorian architecture, but then the whole industry declines. So now it's a more poor area. So this is a maisonette flat, and it was built in the 1920s, which isn't quite what we were going for, because we were preferring Victorian buildings, but it did have, you know, bay windows and fireplaces and original wood floors. So we thought we might as well give it a try. It's been on the market for a while. We did really like the location. So it was right between 2 parks, which would have been nice for Archie. Also had a little private garden. So we did a viewing with that one. So I'm not sure in which order I should tell you this, whether I should show you first or whether I should comment on it first. Maybe I'll just show you first and you can get your own impression. So based on the pictures, it was actually quite nice. It looked like it needed some updating. Obviously, the kitchen was horrible. But when I walked in, I just immediately hated it. So the entire way up was carpeted, and there was a smell to it. There was just like this rough wallpaper on all the walls and ceilings, but not in any nice way. I don't know, it just felt like There wasn't any structural issues that needed doing, but it still was way too much work to get it looking nicely. And also the upstairs bit, that was the maisonette bit of it, felt completely unusable. So it had 2 upstairs rooms. They both would have needed much bigger windows for the rooms to be usable at all. And also it almost felt like the ceiling was caving in on the roof. So yeah, we were just both kind of like in there like, So that was a new down, because I was like, we're never going to find anything as nice as Marchfield House. So then Jack found this flat that he really liked, but I was like, it's a flat, it's in a tenement. It is really big and it looks really nice, but it doesn't have the maisonette, it doesn't have a garden. It's not really what we're looking for at the moment. But we were kind of bored and Jack was like, oh, we might as well view it anyways. So this is the story of the flat that we ended up buying. So with this flat, it is also in Greenock, but it's not in the central bit of Greenock, which has a bit of a bad reputation. It's in Greenock West, which is basically like the western of Glasgow, but cleaner, which I didn't expect, like mansion houses and like alleyway type roads with having kind of like trees on the sides and right on the waterfront. So when I first drove into that part of Greenock, I was like, can we afford to live here? It's just way too nice. And it has the esplanade that runs along the river. So this is where the Clyde opens up to the Atlantic Ocean. On the other side of the Clyde, there's Helensburgh, which is where everyone's rich grandma lives. Behind Helensburgh, there's kind of like Loch Lomond and the Highlands and all of that. So you can see those hills from Greenock, which is actually really nice. Because I've always wanted to live in the Highlands, but obviously we're bound to Glasgow, so we couldn't move out too far. But then this building was the highest building on the street. So it was a tenement house that's also Victorian. But it just kind of felt like I wanted to live in something that's more housey rather than flatty. It felt very much like the tenements we've lived in Glasgow. But we came in and the close was really, really lovely. Had these beautiful Victorian tiles, and then it's the top floor flat. And we came in and it was just really nice. So this flat has 3 bedrooms, a really big living room, so probably twice the size of this living room, 2 storage cupboards, and then a kitchen. But unfortunately the kitchen is also really small, so probably the size of our current kitchen, but arranged a little bit differently. It was definitely a minus point for me, because I would love to have a kitchen that can fit a dining table, but then again, if the kitchen was this big, probably someone in the 60s would have turned it into a bedroom. But the bathroom has a window, so that solves some mold issues. And it just had really nice floors in some of the rooms, not original Victorian ones, but like clearly someone had done a renovation properly in the meantime. So it has a lot of character from, the old Victorian days, but it still has been maintained quite well. The living room's very yellow, but obviously we would paint it green. But it's so big, and it has a little like side storage cupboard in the living room, and the cupboard is probably the size of our current bathroom. And then there's another one coming from a different bedroom. And it's just so big. And one of the bedrooms has built-in wardrobes, which again, would be lovely because we've got our Victorian wardrobes. They're all a little bit awkward. So having this built-in storage would be really, really nice. Because it's so high up, all the houses are low down. So you can look into the hills from the living room, and it's got this massive bay window. And normally bay windows have 3 windows, but this one has 5. So it's like gigantic. So big that Jack was like, oh, we should put a piano in there. And I'm like, Jack, neither of us playing piano. We're not putting a piano here. But the living room is actually so big that we both aren't really sure how to fill it, which is, I guess, a good problem to have. But then there's the 2 bedrooms. So in theory, I would fancy moving the kitchen into one of the bedrooms, which would devalue the flat. But it would mean that we could have a really nice kitchen. But also the kitchen room is, I think, officially not big enough to be a bedroom, but realistically it is another bedroom. So it could be used for other things. But yeah, so at that point I was already kind of like, I do really like this flat, even though it doesn't have the staircase, the garden, the front yard, or anything that I was actually looking for. But it is 100 square meters, which for Scotland is like unheard of. It's massive. And like I said, the living room's so big, it feels like a tennis court. It's just like, what are we even gonna do here? And having the storage cupboards as well, yeah, it just feels like too good to be true. It does have a little bit of water damage to the ceilings. It hasn't been lived in for ages, so it feels like no one's really been looking after it. So kind of like damage like that, even though the roof has been dealt with, it hasn't been fixed. So it looks a little bit worse than what it is, I hope. But if I wasn't sold at that point, it also has a basement room, which again in Scotland is not typical because everything here is basically built on moorland. So if you build a basement, you'll just have it filled with water, but because it's going up the hill, you have the little basement rooms so that is where the Christmas tree can go. The one thing that really sold me on this flat is the view from the northern side. So looking out of the bedroom, you look right onto the ocean, and then Helensburgh on the other side, and then the hills. It's really high, so you get these stunning views, and there's like cruise ships coming in and you can see all of that. And here, you know, I said I love this flat, but also there's just people walking past all the time, so it just like feels like as soon as it gets slightly dark, you have to close the curtains because it just feels like people can see you living in here, and I find that very uncomfortable. Whereas that flat is so high, none of the other neighbors could ever look in, so I'd never have to close the curtains ever again. So that's nice, and you can kind of see the sky and you can see the ocean, and it reminds me a little bit of when I lived in Dundee and I had this view over the Tay. Whereas here it's really hard because we live on a ground floor and then there's buildings across from us, so often it's like raining and I'm like, wait, what is that? Is it raining? And you can't really tell. So that's something I really look forward to just be able to like be a bit more in touch with the outside. But yeah, so that's kind of like where we're at now. So the flat had been on the market for a while and hadn't sold, and I'm not sure why. It does feel like there's like many big issues with it. So it's basically move-in ready, even though knowing us, we're going to do some work to it, like rip out the laminate from the living room. There will be original floorboards underneath it, sand them up, make them pretty. We want to obviously move the kitchen, but that's going to be a future job because that's going to be quite a big job, needing to do all the replumbing and everything. Like I said, the ceiling has a little bit of damage to it, so that needs to be replastered and repainted. And then everything just needs to be painted to not be odd colors, because in Scotland everyone paints everything magnolia all the time. That needs to be taken care of. But other than that, it's like a really nice flat. We need to do a little bit of fixing with some of the windows because there's like most of the rooms have new windows, whereas 2 of the bedrooms have the original Victorian sash windows, which is good because they're going to last forever, but no one's been taking care of them, so we need to restore them a little bit. As for price, the house report said 155. But because it hadn't sold, they went down to offers over 140. So we ended up getting it for 140, which means that even if we were to move the kitchen to the bedroom and lose a bit of value on it, we got it under value anyways. So this is not something that commonly happens in Scotland, getting a flat under value, but I guess we were just lucky. And that means we have more money to spend on renovations, because we're also going to rip out the fireplace and install something that's more similar to this. I'm actually like very, very intrigued to just rip this out and take it with me. But in the new living room, we were very keen on having the fireplace not have like, I don't know if you can see, but it's like we've got a really high fireplace, so the TV doesn't fit over the fireplace, which means normally the sofa is here and the TV is there. So you're kind of just sitting on the sofa like, neck strain. So it would be nice to have the TV over the fireplace and the sofa across from the fireplace, because that just makes more sense. But also the living room is so big, we have so much like space to rearrange things and do things differently. And I'm very excited to have the new view. It doesn't have a private garden, which we have here currently, but also realistically, we haven't used it that much because I'm really weird about privacy. So because we have a private garden, but we have neighbors upstairs and to the sides, and they're all really lovely, but being in the garden and then being able to look out of the kitchen window and see me in the garden just makes me feel like I'm just like in public, just kind of being like, I hate this. So I haven't used the garden as much as I thought. The flat has a garden, but it's a very public garden, so it doesn't have a private space, but it's going to be enough for like drying laundry and to take Archie for a pee-pee if he needs to go at like 3 a.m. So that's fine. And then it's right at the waterfront, morning walks by the ocean. That is the whole story behind moving. We're still renovating this place, so the floors are eventually going to be stained as well. Still needing to do a little bit of work before people can rent this out, just to make sure everything's nice and tidy for the tenants, but also I'd be very happy for them to paint, because I feel like painting should just be something that a tenant is allowed to do. That's me being German. So I'm not going to focus a lot on the renovations we're going to do in this flat, because we're mainly trying to get it tidy and ready for the tenants rather than, you know, expressing ourselves in what we're doing. Whereas the renovations in the new flat I'm already really excited about, because I feel like, you know, having lived in here and having had the chance to do some renovations, there are now some things I would do differently, but maybe wouldn't go out of my way to do them differently in this flat. So, you know, we can start from scratch. We can do everything the way that we imagine it to be now. Every room's just going to be green probably. But very excited. So I'm gonna share more renovation content with you guys in the future. But it seems like we might be getting the keys around October time. So, you know, we might be living in here for a little bit longer and then move over eventually. So lots of renovations are gonna be happening in the new flat. So I'm gonna document all of that and take you along with, you know, more ideas of what we're going to do with each of the rooms and just generally what's going to happen, because I love renovation content, so I hope that you're going to enjoy it as well. But for now, we're going to continue making sewing content, because we're just anxiously waiting for the mortgage to go through, a move-in date to be approved. And yeah, if you're still here, thank you very much for listening to my rambling about moving, and I hope you took something from this. If you're looking for a flat in Scotland, maybe you've learned something. I hope I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.